let's talk about Link-2s, more specifically, this one. Sky Striker Ace Azalea is a Dark Machine Link-2 that requires any combination of 2 light and or dark monsters as link material. She must be link summoned, and you can only special summon one Sky Striker Ace Azalea per turn. If she's special summoned, you can target one card on the field, destroy it, then send her to the graveyard if you have 3 or less spells in your graveyard, and once per turn, at the start of the damage step, if she battles an opponent's monster, you can banish a spell from your graveyard to destroy it. In the context of exactly modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, Azalea's not that bad. She's good generic removal that complements a variety of decks, and considering one of the best archetypes in the game right now special summons themselves and blanks 1/3 of the playable attributes in the game, she's a lot easier to summon than people initially realize. However, Azalea presents a number of questions. The more immediate one is the viability of a Sky Striker package in other decks using Kagori, Engage, and other Sky Striker cards, as Azalea being a Sky Striker Ace means that you can go into any of these Sky Striker links and work your way down the line from there. However, I think the more important question raised is the future of Link-2 design philosophy. Prior to the global pandemic in 2020, many of the generic-ish Link-2s in the TCG fell into one of 3 different categories. The first category was not worth using at all, as many of them are surprisingly very bad even for Yu-Gi-Oh! Standards. The second were generic-ish Link-2s that saw fringe applications, but were mainly used as ways of circumventing Master of War's game design. Quite a few of the Charmers released prior and during this period more or less fall into this kind of category, as many of the decks that existed prior to Master of War were understandably hampered by the need to use links before you could access anything else in your extra deck. The third category are the generic-ish Link-2s that saw widespread adoption, as many of them were useful answers to many of the different problems that modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Ended up developing. Some of the more well-known examples are the Nightmares, more specifically Nightmare Phoenix and Cerberus, as they provided generic answers to back row removal and monster removal respectively. Of course, we can't forget about the fourth category of generic-ish Link-2s, those that were so good that they ended up having to be banned. That being said, the TCG debut of 2 Link-2 monsters prior to the global pandemic definitely changed how we looked at generic-ish Link-2s, and will definitely change how we look at them in the years to come. Those 2 cards, of course, Crystron Halqifibrax and Predaplant Verte Anaconda. On the one hand, Crystron Halqifibrax gave virtually any deck another game plan with most good hand traps, with the only concession being that usually you'd end up having to normal summon it because your normal game plan was disrupted. But that didn't really matter in the long run because Halqifibrax did a lot of things really well. On the other hand, Predaplant Verte Anaconda was a reminder that fusion engines usually don't enable very healthy deck building patterns, and we'll get to that in a minute. First, let's talk about Halqifibrax though. What did he allow decks to do, and why was he eventually banned? Hulk allowed basically everyone an effortless OTK line, in part thanks to Vela, Selene, and Access Code. One of the most ubiquitous examples of this is Sky Strikers themselves, as this was usually the only way that they could afford to make an OTK line. That being said, it turned a lot of lower power decks solely into Access Code OTK, especially even after Master Rule 4 got rectified, which understandably homogenized deck building to an almost annoying degree. Any tuner that summoned another body or replaced itself with another body on board was effectively purged to keep the card alive, with some of the more famous examples, Steam the Cloak and Mecha Phantom Beast O-Lion, only recently considered to be taken off the ban list now that Hulk is gone. Additionally, it enabled some very degenerate combos, probably some of the most well-known in recent history, thanks to its synergy with one other particular Link monster, the Link-3 Mecha Phantom Beast Auroradon. This gave birth to probably the most interesting portmanteau in recent card game history in the Hulkdon combo. Auroradon enabled some very unpredictable things in tandem with Halqifibrax. On summon, it summoned 3 tokens, which could be used for a number of things, which included 1. Continuously reviving Despot 001 to use a synchro material, ending on a very infamous example of 5 negate boards. 2. Making Denlong with a small Yang Zing package in order to search an Omni negate in 9 pillars. 3. Bolstering the already strong end boards of other synchro decks like Sword Soul in order to win turn 1. You'll see this a lot in Master Duel in recent memory, and it's still prevalent to this day, thankfully, until Halqifibrax also got banned there. This highlights that not only was Halqifibrax a problem by itself, it enabled way too many alternate game plans in other decks. It highlighted just how problematic generic-ish Link-2s were becoming, with how many tuners it ended up banning in its wake. The Halq-Dong combo was arguably and understandably a matchup nightmare, as you can't exactly prepare for a deck that basically has more game plans than you have options. Yes, it does die to quite a few hand traps, but when it's backed up by decks that already are very resilient to hand traps, you have a nightmare on your hands. Halqifibrax was very contentious for a number of reasons, and it stands as no surprise that both cards are banned in some form across both formats to this day. That doesn't mean that Verte is any better in that regard. On paper, Verte seems very middling by itself, but it did enable quite a few fusion cards to see new ubiquitous play at first. It already had a couple of pretty strong targets on release, that being Super Poly and Neos Fusion. The former allowed you to eat basically any monster, which is a godsend form of removal in itself, combined with the fact that Super Poly doesn't target. The latter gave you another form of removal in the form of Rainbow Neos, who could reset either the front row or the back row of your opponent's board, or reset their graveyard in exchange for a simple discard. However, Verte did become more problematic as time went on, especially as Master Rule 4 got revised, and that was in part thanks to more powerful fusion targets, those two being Red Ice Fusion and Fusion Destiny. Any two monsters on board, thanks to Red Ice Fusion, could effectively make Red Ice Dark Dragoon, a pseudo towers that also backed itself up with an Omni Negate and only got stronger the more it negated. This became a big problem in the OCG, as having something as powerful as Dragoon backed up by a card like Maxi almost entirely gave birth to modern board breakers as we see today. Cards like Dark Ruler No More and later Forbidden Droplet were basically more or less the only reason that this card was even allowed to be a thing in the TCG, and though it didn't see as much play over here, it is still considered a big problem for a lot of reasons. Thankfully, Red Ice Fusion was a very tough garnet to open with, as it limited the amount of plays you could make before and afterwards, which did limit its power ceiling in the TCG quite a lot. Unfortunately, Fusion Destiny did not have this issue. Fusion Destiny allowed you access to Destiny Hero Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, a self-reviving pop with a debuff effect attached to it. DPE was really hard to get rid of, and could very quickly and easily clear boards without much support at all. FD also didn't prevent you from using your normal summon, which did allow you to play it after all your normal plays if you opened with it, and therefore meant you had a very strong secondary option if your main plays were negated, or even better, if you could still use your normal plays, you could just end on Fusion Destiny because it still had the same ability of using fusion materials from your deck. The DPE engine also, most notably, allowed you a draw 2 in Celestial, allowing you to re-top up your hand, as well as a double summon-like effect in Destiny Hero Dasher. Verte and FD effectively homogenized how we saw deck building because of how easy and powerful they were to use in most decks. Being able to cheat out a quote-unquote secondary boss monster with Verte was just another effortless plan B that made these kinds of cards very annoying to deal with. But what point am I trying to make here? The point I'm trying to make here, and I think the most salient point that we can move away with, is that generic-ish Link-2 cards like Halqifibrax and Verte proved to be a bit of a bottleneck on future card design. That's saying a lot considering that Konami often speeds up the pace of the game more quickly than the Industrial Revolution did for virtually the entire world, but having cards that enable too many Plan B engines like these two does become a massive problem, both for the diversity of the game and game balance. Cards like Electromite and the two aforementioned are very extreme examples, but do prove to set very dangerous precedents that could gravely affect how we see future cards being printed going forward. On the other hand, cards like Azalea and Donna, Dagger for Hire, are nice generic staples that don't necessarily break the balance of the game, and move back to that sort of fundamental toolbox aspect that links were often being used for prior to the global pandemic. So that leads to the question, where do generic-ish Link-2s go from here? Cards like Splight Elf come dangerously close to the level of Hulk and Verte because of all the good level, Link, and rank 2 cards that exist out there, and Artifact Dagda is still a ripe issue thanks to the continued existence of Cypherlocks not being addressed by Konami. Alternatively, Link-2s like the Charmers, namely Dark and Ulcer, have seen new life thanks to the existence of Splight and Tier formats respectively, whilst Masquerade still proves to be a consistently solid card that sees continual play thanks to the amount of options it brings up, namely cards like Borrel Load and Avramax to name a few. As I think the name suggests, I do feel that links should be a nice bridge for decks, rather than the breaking point that tips the game over into a point of no return. Having secondary utility thanks to cards like Dogmatica Punishment and Nadir's Servant is also nice, but as cards like Diviner of the Herald prove, that could potentially be questionable game design that I don't think Konami is willing to break willingly anytime in the future. So, what do I think about generic-ish Link 2s? Should they stay? Should they go? I think some of them are alright. Azalea definitely proves that. I think some are still way too good. But let's see which way Konami goes from here. Let's just hope it's not as wild as 2020 was. That's for sure, eh?